Today begins the fight of the American worker to keep jobs here in America and create jobs here in America, and we won't quit.
Here's a corporation that took millions of dollars, your tax dollars and mine,
to move middle-class jobs to Mexico to make them poverty jobs.
Something is immoral about that.
If we are to survive, it will take all of us working together to make America great once again.
It's time that all of us stood up like we're doing today and locked arms and said, enough is enough, bring the jobs back here.
Well, that was earlier this year, and unfortunately that particular story does not have a happy ending. That Whirlpool factory in Evansville, Indiana, is closing this coming Friday, going to Mexico. It brings us to our conversation for today. With us, Max Fraser, who's a contributor to The Nation magazine, where he also directs the internship program. Also with us, Michael Whitney. Michael is a contributor to Firedoglake, where he directs the online campaigning. Welcome. You also worked at one point as an organizer for SEIU, is that right?
Online organizer.
So you know some of this disappointment on the ground. Coming to you, you wrote recently in the June 16th issue of The Nation magazine about the SEIU and the labor movement more broadly after the departure of Andrew Stern. There's a quote in there from Mary Kay Henry, who's taking over at SEIU, where she says, "We're still fighting for sick days, for paid sick days." Yeah. For healthcare workers, she's talking about the Sodexo fight. It's 2010.
Yeah.
In very broad strokes, what do you make of where labor has or hasn't come under Obama so far?
Well, I think it's a tough question, and I think it's one that's confronting Mary Kay as she takes over this union, which is in a moment of transition, and in many ways a moment of transition that typifies what the labor movement more broadly is facing. There was a lot of time and resources that went into both getting Obama elected and then supporting the first year of his presidency in terms of mobilizing support for the stimulus package and healthcare reform and things like that. In the end, though, on the kind of bread and butter issues for labor, things haven't turned out the way that I think SEIU and other unions had hoped for. I mean, most notably, of course, this is about the defeat of the Employee Free Choice Act, which the entire labor movement put a lot of energy into, and particularly SEIU. I think what Mary Kay Henry was suggesting there, conveying there about all that remained undone since she had joined the union, and she's been in SEIU for almost 3 decades, or more than 3 decades, is a palpable sense of frustration about what labor is or is not getting from a Democratic White House and a Democratic Congress.
Well, what it got recently was a bunch of grief for having backed the anti-incumbent in that Arkansas race of Blanche Lincoln. You wrote about it, Michael. What do you think is the likely fallout for labor of having been on the opposite side of the leadership at the Democratic Party?
Well, I think that the problem that SEIU and other unions like the AFL-CIO Federation face with the Arkansas Senate race is they took a chance to stand up for their members against a senator who was very much against everything that working families stood for, and who, along with just a handful of other senators, stopped the Employee Free Choice Act, which was organized labor's top priority. The fallout from that is immediately after Blanche Lincoln was declared the victor, an anonymous senior White House official decided to go to 3 major publications and call organized labor absolute idiots who flushed $10 million down the toilet. If that wasn't bad enough, the head of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee proceeded to say that he still expected labor's money for Democratic Senate candidates. And it's just this general feeling that organized labor is getting stepped all over by the White House on this, when the White House thinks that they've done enough for labor, that labor shouldn't be trying to force the White House's hand in Arkansas Senate and other races, when in fact that many of labor's top priorities, with the exception of just a few, have been forgotten about in the first few years of the Obama administration.
And
it's
you
a big problem.
Up the numbers, over $15 million spent between 2006 and 2008 by labor groups for giving to the DSCC, the Senate Campaign Committee.
$15.8 million. And that's just in direct contributions to DSCC-endorsed candidates and to the committee itself.
So just for Senate races?
Just for Senate races, not counting any independent expenditures run like ads by organizations in the state, not counting on-the-ground efforts that labor expended. That's just $15.8 million in direct contributions. Max wrote in his piece that there was a conglomerate of number of unions that had the goal of putting 60 senators in the Senate who could support Obama's agenda. It turned out that was just money completely wasted, and the DSCC and Democratic Party want even more.
So what's the reaction? I mean, is there any move to say, stop the flow of cash?
Well, I'm not sure if we've seen that yet, but I think labor has to ask itself, A, how much they get by continuing their partnership with the Democratic Party, and B, why it is that partnership has become such a one-way street. I mean, on some levels, this isn't surprising. The Democratic Party is largely beholden to the kind of similar, if not the same, corporate interests which support the Republican Party. This is not new, of course, but labor has a certain kind of effectiveness as an interest group within the Democratic coalition so long as it is able to maintain and expand its industrial and economic power, and that means organizing. And that means reversing the kind of declining trends in terms of density figures in the private sector of the economy. I think that until labor is able to effectively do that again, you'll see a kind of diminishing returns on its political capital like you see in Arkansas and elsewhere. I mean, the problem in Arkansas or with employee free choice is that labor is depending on votes in states where they have virtually no membership. And so they can pour a lot of money in, but they can't mobilize the kind of shop floor and grassroots power necessary to swing those votes or those primary campaigns.
There are some examples of organizing that's taking a new kind of approach. Here's a clip from the field. It's part of the Sodexo campaign involving healthcare workers, janitors, nursing home folks. This is at the University of Georgia, where students and workers are working together. It's an SEIU campaign. Take a look.
The reason I'm a brigader this summer and why I chose to get involved with Clean Up Sodexo is because this is happening right here on my campus. And I don't want to go to a school where workers are exploited and I'm right there. I eat at that cafeteria. I don't want to buy food from a place that exploits their workers and pays them almost nothing. And that's something very concrete to me, that's something very real to me, and something very real to everyone else.
Now, based on your experience as an organizer online, Michael, what's your sense of how far down the frustration filters? Does it reach people like that who were involved in a pretty modern-style campaign on the ground?
I think to some extent, a lot of people are frustrated if they have any sort of inkling to support organized labor, to support workers who need to get by in this extremely tough economy. I think that what we're seeing is a number of people who are supporting like that campaign, who are either organized labor staff, who are working people who want to have a fair wage, are frustrated by essentially not much changing at all with the efforts that unions put down in the 2008 election and since then to really have an environment possible where workers can join unions free of intimidation. Yeah. What we're seeing with Sodexo is really interesting because now we're seeing former House Democratic leader Dick Gephardt lobbying for Sodexo and against organized labor. And it's that kind of abandonment by people who should be close allies that just continuously undercuts everything that organized labor tries to do.
Yeah. Now, there is an opportunity maybe to turn a tide. Coming to you, Max, there's a lot of heat growing around the treatment of BP cleanup workers with the Assistant Secretary of Labor at OSHA sending a letter to Thad Allen, who's directing the cleanup operation, charging that BP is denying people information, denying people protection, treating them in violation of U.S. labor law. This could be something that could help the administration regain some standing in labor circles. How's it going so far?
Well, I think it could, and I think similarly it could also. There's so much obviously popular resentment and disgust about how that whole situation, not just in terms of labor issues, but generally environmental and otherwise, has been handled, that it's the kind of thing that could build a kind of popular support among students and otherwise, which I think is necessary to revitalize the labor movement more broadly. I mean, the most effective period of growth and also of political effectiveness for the labor movement was coming out of a period in the 1930s where you have a real kind of dynamic workers' movement, which you don't really see today in a similar way, and the setting of the Gulf could provide that context.
Although even in that context, unions are getting attacked by the right. Here's a clip of how the right are talking about this particular issue. Take a look.
A businessman from Dallas who has a proposal to bring as many as 25 boats like this to the Gulf says,
it is radio silence, Brian. That's the frustrating thing.
Fred McAllister says his plan has been submitted through appropriate channels. He has 12 boats ready to go and a line on 13 more. The problem is they are not U.S. owned and operated boats and therefore are barred from working in U.S. coastal waters by a 1920s law known as the Jones Act. Some believe the Obama administration has been slow in waiving the Jones Act out of fear it will offend organized labor.
They hate when the Jones Act gets waived, and they pound on politicians when they do that. So is this a question of we're giving in to unions?
So there you have an attack on unions claiming that they were responsible for sending away some of the foreign, quote-unquote, ships who could have perhaps helped, some of them just simply non-U.S. based companies.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this is part of the right's continued assault on organized labor as one of the key legs of the Democratic Party, as well as just for any sort of movement against corporate control. I think what we're seeing...
What was the truth, though, behind what he said?
Well, the truth is that unions are not involved in the Gulf cleanup effort at all. It's a non-union state, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. Unions are non-existent. All the workers that are hired by BP are private subcontractors.
So that should be a problem in and of itself. Well, Michael Whitney, thanks so much. And Max Fraser. We'll link to Max's article and a whole lot more at thenation.com, at our website, grittv.org. More coming up on Grit TV. Stay tuned.